Hello, this is Photography Gamer. Welcome back to the channel. So today is the first episode of a new series focusing on virtual photography in gaming. For those who don't already know, as well as being a reviewer, I'm also a professional photographer as well as being a virtual photographer. And if you're a subscriber, you'll know that I've done a few photo mode tutorials since the channel started. But with this series, I'm going to go into more depth on individual photo modes. And each episode, I'm going to pick a special topic to discuss that will help develop virtual photographers and maybe kind of demystify some of the things that go into making a good photograph. So the first photo mode I'll be looking at is Horizon Zero Dawn, after which I'll be discussing this episode's special topic, which is getting started and finding your own style as a virtual photographer. And I'll wrap up the episode with a Q&A session of some questions that I've been sent by virtual photographers on Twitter. But first, let's look at Horizon Zero Dawn. So Horizon Zero Dawn, it's a beautiful game first and foremost. So if you're taking pictures in games, the games that look the best are usually a good place to start. Horizon Zero Dawn's pretty user friendly, it's pretty accessible, and I'd say it's good for beginners, but also if you're more advanced, it's got enough tools in there. But let's break down the photo mode. Okay, before I go into the menus, let's look at the basic functionality. You've got the craning system. Now the crane, you use the two triggers to lift the crane up and lift the crane down. It basically just creates perspective. Craning is good if you want to impact how the image feels, because the lower the camera position, if it's looking up at a subject, the subject will feel more, there'll be more scale and size, so it will make something appear bigger or look more kind of epic. Whereas if you crane up and look down, it can create more of a kind of like a observational, kind of like a panoramic view. You've also got an option to make Aloy look at the camera by clicking in one of the joysticks. So that's good if you want to have, candid portraits are good, but if you want eye contact, that's a nice feature. And the other basic feature is the grid system. Now the grid breaks the image up into 9 equally sort of distanced parts. Thirds are interesting because when you take a picture, quite often if you put a subject to one side, it gives more of a sense of balance because you have the subject and the thing in the distance, which is the background. That doesn't mean you can't frame in the middle, but seeing where the thirds are is a good option to have because it gives you kind of a nice way of measuring distance. Okay, so the first screen, we've got field of view. Now field of view basically acts like a focal length in a way, but you can think of it as an artificial zoom. However, if you do go very wide with the field of view, sometimes you create like a barrel distortion, so the image looks like it has a curvature on it. It looks a bit like a sort of semi-fisheye lens, so it's not necessarily the best thing to do for wide shots. I would use field of view predominantly to get very tight into a shot, to get a very super close-up. You have view roll. Now view roll, it's a way of basically slanting and tilting the image. Now you would think, why would you want to do that? Well, they do it a lot in film, in cinematography. Having a flat image is great, but if you want to create a sense of dynamism and movement, if you slant the image to one side or the other, it can create that sense of action, like an action shot. Like if you're running from a monster and you pause the game and you want to take a picture, using the view roll is a good way of creating a kind of a sense of motion and dynamic movement. So that's what I would use that for. Then you can hide the player if you don't want Aloy in the picture, if you just want to do landscapes. Face paint if you've unlocked it. I'm not sure why I haven't. Maybe you've got to complete some task. Facial expressions. Well, facial expressions is a good option to have. It depends on the situation. What do you want? Do you want a comedy face? Do you want like something serious? It really is a personal preference, but it's nice to have an option to change it, as is the body pose option. Now, this is a real time saver because sometimes it's very difficult to get the character to have the right body position when you pause the game. Sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. So here you've got lots of different options, standing ones, sitting ones, lying down. Play around with these because these all have a different kind of feeling, and you can then change the body pose and then change the image afterwards because you might change a position and it might change how the image feels. So next we've got depth of field, focal distance and aperture. And so the depth of field is really kind of where the focus is at. Do you want everything in the shot in focus, or do you want a very, very narrow, slim area in focus? So what I mean by that is, let's say there's a person there, you want to take a picture of them, but you don't want the background in focus. So you get the focal distance correct to where the character is. The distance between you and the character, where that line is where the character is, that's in focus. Everything before it and after it will be out of focus if you deal with the aperture correctly. Aperture's dealt with in f-stops, so if you have a high f-stop number like f22, everything you're looking at in the picture will be in focus and crystal clear. If you use a low f-stop number, the amount of focus will be narrow, so if you want to do a very sort of blurry, emphasized portrait on an object or a person, use a low aperture and just blur the background out. You don't have to blur it completely, sometimes only a little bit, because it can create nice shapes and colors in the background. So depth of field, aperture, focal distance, they're very important things, and you really need to know what you're trying to do with the image before you know which one will work. Like landscapes, generally I'd use a wide open f-stop, like f22 or something, whatever they've got on here. If I'm doing a portrait, I might use an f22 to have it wide open, depends what's in the image, But if I want to really solo in on something, zone in on one object and think, right, this is the focus, then I would use a lower aperture, but maybe not all the way down. You just play around with it until you get a nice balance. Next, we have brightness, overexposure, colorize, and intensity. So the brightness and exposure, those, you don't have a lot of post-production options in Horizon Zero Dawn, so you have to use brightness and exposure creatively if you want to add artificial light, and it's really just depends on the image. Sometimes you just have to kind of play around with both. Raise one, lower one, see how it looks. Colorize is basically filters. So the game has quite a few, and the intensity is what it is. It's like if you use 100%, then that filter is extreme. So if you use the black and white filter on 100% intensity, you'll have a black and white image. Drop it to 50, you have a kind of a half desaturated image, so it kind of muted colors. All these features, I'd say play around with them, because sometimes you can do different things with each of them and it'll create something different in the image you hadn't thought about, like in terms of the color balance. Next, we have time of day. Now, time of day, obviously it changes the ambient light. It changes the temperature of the light. So if it's nighttime, it's more blue and dark and green. If it's daytime, you're more like orangey kind of warmth glow. But changing the time of day doesn't just change the ambience and the light and the kind of atmospheric light. You need to think of the time of day like a big light bulb that you're moving around the subject, because as you change the time of day, the shadows on your subject will change, because the sun is basically like a big light source. So if you want your character brightly lit, have the sun in front of them. If you want like a sort of a nice hazy glow behind them, have the sun behind them. If you want to create dynamic shadows on your subject, have the sun to the left or the right, or like a quarter distance. And then you'll have a nice kind of moody sort of, maybe sort of film noir style with heavy shadow. Then we've got borders, small logos, and greetings. So these are really, if you just want to kind of create little nuanced images with adding a bit of like logo, like make a poster for the game kind of thing. I don't personally use these that much, but you've got a lot of different border options, so you can make like a sort of a widescreen cinematic kind of filmic style one. But yeah, play around with those. And then you've got vignetting, size and intensity. Now, a lot of people don't really understand vignetting, like what it's for. A vignette basically creates a kind of a shadowy dark border, like a circular kind of area that kind of closes into the image. And the idea of a vignette is to emphasize the center of the image. It focuses your eye, because what it does, it makes the borders dark, gradually, progressively darker. So naturally your eye will go to the light. So if the center of the image is lighter, that's where your eyes are going. So a vignette is good for creating kind of focal point that you really want to hone in on. If there's stuff around the border of the image that you want to kind of lose, you don't want to lose, but you want to kind of stop people looking at it, a vignette is good for that. But you got to be careful, because if you do it too intense, it looks just like a circle. Play around with the intensity and the size and just try and create it so you don't really notice it, but it does the job. So those are all the options. For me, it's a very good photo mode. If you're a beginner, I'd say this is a really good place to start, because it's very user-friendly. It's got limited functionality. It's not too complex, and it's fairly well implemented. The game looks fantastic as well. So beginners, this is a great place to start. But also advanced photographers, you've got enough here to play around with to create some sensational shots. So on the screen right now, you'll see some pictures I've taken through my various playthroughs, and it's definitely very colourful. It's a very vibrant game, very kind of pleasing on the eye. In terms of scoring it, I'd probably give it like a 9 out of 10 for the photo mode, because it's got enough in there to be very good. It doesn't quite have everything it would need. I think it maybe some more post-production options and contrast and various other functionalities, like maybe split toning options. But it's got enough for you to get started, and I personally really like it. I think it's one of the better photo modes, and I would recommend it for anyone who's really just looking to sort of experiment. Okay, so that's Horizon Zero Dawn, very good mode. So the special topic of the episode, getting started and finding your own style. So what would I say about like getting started in photography, whether it's real or virtual? It's the same principle. You know, all I can say is practice makes perfect. Like when I started doing photographs in real life, I took so many pictures, and let's be honest, most of them were garbage. But amongst the garbage, there were the one or two that I looked at and thought, there's something there. There's something in those images that I'm drawn to. And what it is, it's identifying the feeling you had when you took the picture, because a photograph, really, what are you doing? You're taking a snapshot of a moment in time, yes, but it's also a feeling, because as a photographer, what you're trying to do is crystallize a moment in time. But it's not just the moment, it's the feeling, it's the emotion, it's how you experienced it and how you take the camera to capture that moment so that somebody else can look at that photo and they might feel it. They might feel that moment that you felt. So when you look at your pictures, the ones that you will probably be drawn to are the ones that bridge that gap between feelings and like the crystallization of that in an image. And that process is not easy. It's difficult because it's almost impossible to get 100%, because a feeling and a tangible image that you can look at, they're not the same thing. So it's trying to create an image that gets as close as you can to how the experience felt for you. And there's so many different aspects to make that happen. But in terms of getting started with virtual photography, first thing I would say, just don't worry about other people's work. Don't look at, like, there's people who've been doing it for years, right? So they're going to be better than you. That's fine, because they've put the work in, they've practiced, and you get better in time. But what you get better at, you get better at capturing what you're feeling and expressing it in the image. So you don't necessarily, you take 100 pictures and when you start, 5 of them get what you want. 2-3 years down the line, a lot more of the pictures you take feel the way you want them to. But that's just a process of refining your method, refining your techniques, and really just understanding what it is you're trying to say. Because there's a lot of different genres of photography. You know, you have portraits, you've got landscapes, you've got fine art, black and white, documentary stuff, travel, and all of these things are different. And like looking back when I started, my first year of photography, I don't really like a lot of the images because they didn't feel like me. They felt like I was just trying to capture something. You know, I'd seen other people's work and I was like, oh, maybe I'll do it like that, maybe I'll do it like this. And that really was my biggest mistake. What I would say is just follow your instincts, because the best photographs that you will ever take, whoever you are, the best photos that you'll ever take will be images that are honest to who you are. So if you're naturally, instinctively interested in people and portraits, that's where you'll go. That's where you'll go to do the best work you'll ever do. If you suddenly say, I'm just going to do landscapes, you might become an amazing landscape photographer. But your natural inclination will always be people. And that's the trick. It's letting yourself just be yourself, because photography, it's not like a 100-meter sprint or a MMA fight. You don't know definitively who's better than other people. It's a subjective art form, and there isn't such a thing as a good or a bad photo. It's just the photographer knows, you know, if you take a picture and it captures the way you felt perfectly, you look at that picture and you're like, yes, bang on the money, that's what I wanted. Someone else might say, oh, I hate that picture, or I love it. Either way, it doesn't really affect your journey as the photographer. You're just trying to capture the moment, how you experienced it. That's all it is. That's all photography is. Don't get caught up on the competition element. By all means, enter competitions for a bit of fun, but photography is a competition between yourself. It's a competition between the way you feel and your technical ability to transfer that feeling through this kind of like ether into a physical photograph that you can then show other people. So it's like a translation. It's like your feeling is a language and the photo is a language, but they're not the same language. So you need to find a way to communicate between the two. And once you practice and practice, keep practicing, you start to learn the two dialects and they start to become interwoven, and that's when you'll start to create the best images you can create. Just keep trying, keep practicing. By all means, ask for advice, ask for tips, but you've got to really, if you want to know what kind of photographer you are, do a bunch of photographs and look through them. And the ones that you're drawn to will tell you the story. So if you're drawn to landscapes, you're probably more about landscape photography, places, objects. But if you're more of a personable individual, you'll be drawn to people, or you might be someone who likes to look at the scene, or like a cinematic photographer or a documentary photographer or something like that. So finding your style takes time. It takes time, repetition, practice. But the only way you're going to get there is by doing it. So if you're taking pictures and you're looking at them and thinking, oh God, this looks rubbish, I'm so bad compared to everyone else. Hey, I've been there. Every real life photographer's been there. Every virtual photographer's been there. If they haven't, they're lying, because no one is great at anything straight away. You got to get better and you got to practice. Practice a lot. Keep doing it. Listen to advice. Take on board what you want to take on board, but don't compromise your own style. Be yourself. Follow your instincts and follow the kind of feeling of what you want to capture. Don't worry about I'm going to do this because these people will like it. That will be fine, but in the long run, it's not going to be good for you, because what would you rather be, a photographer who's honest to themselves, or would you rather be a photographer who creates a product that other people like but you don't really like it and it's not really you? So everyone likes something that isn't you. You're better off following your own gut instinct and being true to your style. Just have fun with it, keep going, and you will get there. But it takes time. Some people have been doing this for decades and you don't just have it immediately. Okay, so we're almost done. So now it's time for some questions and answers. So thank you. I've been sent, how many have I been sent? 5 or 6 questions? I can't remember. Right, we've got them here. Okay, so first question is, how does your time in photo mode compare to time you spend actually playing the game? Well, personally, I don't play games to take pictures necessarily. If there is a photo mode, I am aware of it. So I'm like, okay, it's there. But I like to enjoy my games. I'm a gamer first and foremost. So I don't take that many pictures. Maybe if I'm having a session, maybe 5% of the time I'll be taking pictures, but the other 95 I'm playing. Also, it depends on the game. If it's a game where there's a really integral story that I really want to become immersed in, I maybe won't take photos on my first playthrough, because photo modes are good, but they can also disrupt the momentum of a story. So I generally don't spend too much time in the photo modes unless I'm doing something specific for a video. I just play the game and I just see how it unfolds. And if there is a moment in that experience where I'm like, this is nice, let's take a picture, then I'll take one, but I don't force it. I think that's one important bit of advice. It's sometimes you'll stop to take a picture, spend 10 minutes trying to find it, and then you look at it and this is crap. I've been there many times, and sometimes it's better to just walk away and okay, maybe next time. But I don't spend too much time in it. But if you're new to it, it's probably better to spend more time doing photos, because that's how you'll improve. I've spent years doing it in real life, so I've kind of got that grounding already, so I don't necessarily need to spend as much time in it. But it's just finding the balance that works for you, really. But for me, it's a small amount of time, but because I kind of know my style. Okay, next question. How do you go about taking pictures, and what techniques do you use? Well, I don't really have a standard format. Whether I'm editing, whether I'm taking pictures, I treat every situation like an individual moment. I don't have a standard procedure. If I'm playing a game, I'm wandering around and I'm like, oh, I see something. I think, okay, photo. Pause it. First thing I do, framing, composition. Then focal distance, what's in focus, what isn't. Maybe tweak the composition a bit. Then I'll look at color, filters, body position. But once you have the framing, it's just dealing with the small details. I very much do it spontaneously. I just kind of have the game experience, and then things just pop into my mind or my eye line, and I'm like, there's a sunset, there's some silhouettes, there's this, maybe that would be good at black and white. I could do this as a portrait, use that background for depth or texture or something like that. So it's a very free form approach, and it's probably because I've been doing it for so long. Okay, next question. I see a lot of people posting photo mode stuff, and I was wondering how much of it is photo mode and how much is edited on mobile/PC. Well, it's kind of difficult to tell, because some games don't really have inbuilt editing software. Like Days Gone's a good example of a game that has a lot of functionality, so you can really post-process in the game. But some people take pictures in the game and they don't really do any post-production. They just take the screenshot once it's framed and then they put it into Photoshop and do editing and stuff. So it's difficult to actually look at a picture and say how much of it was done in game and how much wasn't. Usually if it's very over-processed, it's probably done in an app or in the thing, but there's no right or wrong way of doing it. But it's like, for me, I don't really edit the pictures I do them in the game because I want them to represent what the game is looking like. But if you're just taking them for fun, then it doesn't really matter if you're using mobile stuff, PC stuff, or in-game. It's all part of the process. Okay, next question. I've tried to use photo mode in a few games, but they're all so different. What's a couple of basic things that they all have in common to get good shots? I do agree all the photo modes being different is quite annoying. I'd like a universal system that's just across the board because it would save everybody so much hassle. I think that will happen eventually, but all games, framing is something that's consistent. You have to move the camera somewhere to take the picture. So to do that, you've got to know what you want to frame. So framing is the first thing you really want to practice, because framing dictates how the picture feels, because what you've got within the frame is going to dictate what's going to be felt. Then you can deal with focus and contrast, filters, etc. But framing is something you can do in every game without really any difference. Maybe they have different buttons for it, but I would say framing is a really important part, and get good at framing, or get an understanding of what you want to frame and how you want to frame it and how to best utilize the frame itself, how to make the most of it. Try not to have any waste in there. Like if something is in there and it's distracting from the overall, then try and crop it or frame it a different way. Okay, one more question. Is there a right and wrong way to photograph a game? I see a lot of really stylized shots that look nothing like the game, and some are just straight screenshots. Which do people prefer? Well, taking a screenshot of a cutscene, is it a photograph? I'm not so sure. Like photo mode, if you enter a photo mode, frame it, compose it, take the picture, that's more of a kind of a authentic photograph. But taking a screenshot is a kind of an observational timing issue. So it's still an image that they've seen and captured, but it was already kind of composed and framed by the people who did the editing on the cutscene itself. Whereas a photo mode shot is more like an actual photo, because you've actually had to move the camera, pause the game, find the moment itself. Which do people prefer? I quite like both. I have some people I follow who do screenshots of cutscenes, and they look great, because a lot of these cutscenes are very professionally done now, and they're very much done by professional cinematographers, so I can appreciate that. And if you've got an eye for a photo, nothing wrong with taking screenshots of cutscenes. For me personally, I prefer photo mode stuff because it shows more creative initiative, because you've actually got to cultivate it from scratch. You're not actually watching a kind of on rails movie. I think if it's a compelling and captivating moment and image and it looks good, I think people will like it, because that's what photography is. It's all about moments and feelings and atmosphere. And if you find a moment, whether it's a straight screenshot of a cutscene or a cultivated, created photo, they both can have the same impact. Personally, I prefer the photo mode stuff, but each to their own, and they both have their kind of merits. Okay, well there you go. Thank you for the questions. If you'd like to send me some questions for the next episode, please tweet me at photog_gamer, and I'll do my best to answer as many of those in the next video. I'm not sure what game I'll be covering in the next episode, possibly God of War, but let me have a look at that. But if you've got any questions about photo modes, virtual photography in general, please tweet me and I'll compile those for the next video. So there you go, Horizon Zero Dawn, finding your style, getting started, and some Q&A. I hope that was useful. Hopefully some of the things I've said have helped. Hopefully you can see what Horizon Zero Dawn is like to take pictures in, and I'll get working on the next episode in the next few weeks. So thank you for watching. If you liked this video and you want to see more photo tutorials or game reviews, please like and subscribe. But thanks for watching. I hope you have a good day. This is Photography Gamer signing off. Thank you.